The term highly sensitive person, HSP, often comes with a stigma or a label that some may not understand. It's estimated that about 15 to 20% of people are highly sensitive. This means that 1 in every 5 people might feel overwhelmed by loud noises, bright lights, intense emotions, and even the energy of a room. I've always been one of those people. For years, I didn't know what it was about me that made me feel so different. I couldn't place it, but I could always sense it deep inside. It was the way I felt after spending time with others, exhausted, drained, and on edge. It was the way I could feel every slight shift in someone's tone of voice, the way my heart raced during conversations where I wasn't even being criticized. It was like my mind was constantly on overdrive, processing and analyzing everything around me, yet never really knowing how to stop. The struggle started as a child. I remember walking into a crowded classroom, immediately overwhelmed by the sound of pencils scribbling, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the chatter of my classmates. I would feel a wave of dizziness wash over me, like I could barely breathe. I would sit at my desk, hands clenched, trying so hard to focus on the lesson. But all I could hear was the noise that swirled around me. It was hard for me to concentrate, let alone answer the teacher's questions. The more I tried to hide my discomfort, the worse it got. It felt like no one could understand why I had such a hard time in those situations. At home, it wasn't much better. My family loved me, of course, but I could tell they didn't get me. They didn't understand why I would retreat to my room after a family gathering or become upset after watching a movie that wasn't even scary. My parents would say, "You're too sensitive," as if it was something I could turn off at will. But I couldn't. I felt everything so deeply. The emotions of others hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt like I was drowning in them. I struggled through my teenage years in a world that didn't know how to deal with someone like me. I was called dramatic, overly emotional, or worse, too much. I felt alone in a crowd, like I was always on the outside looking in. It wasn't that I didn't want to connect with people. I did, but it felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, worried that anything could trigger an emotional flood. When things got too much, I would retreat into myself. I would find solace in silence, in being alone with my thoughts, away from the world's noise. But no matter how much I tried to shut it all out, the world kept coming at me. Every crowded space felt like a battlefield. Every conversation felt like an emotional minefield. I couldn't escape it. The smallest things would send me spiraling. A harsh comment from a friend would linger in my mind for days, even weeks. A glance, a look of disappointment from my parents, would leave me feeling like I had failed. I couldn't understand why I felt everything so much more intensely than others. It felt like a curse. The exhaustion was constant. At work, I would find myself overwhelmed by the tiniest demands. A colleague's frustration over a missed deadline would knock me off balance. A critical email would send me into a panic. I would replay conversations over and over in my mind, questioning whether I had said the wrong thing, wondering if I had offended anyone. It was like I was walking through life with an open wound, constantly being exposed to the harshness of the world without a way to protect myself. My relationships were affected too. I'd often find myself on edge with my partner, feeling overwhelmed by their needs or emotions. I couldn't handle when things got too heated. I would retreat, unable to handle the flood of feelings that surged through me. I loved deeply, but I struggled with being in situations that made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how to protect my heart, how to keep from getting lost in the emotions of others. I felt like I was constantly on the verge of drowning in a sea of feelings. The worst part was the self-doubt. I would ask myself over and over, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? I tried to hide my sensitivity, to push it aside, to be stronger. But the more I fought it, the more it consumed me. It felt like an endless cycle, and I couldn't find my way out. Every day was a struggle to manage my emotions, to navigate a world that felt too much, too overwhelming. I began to shut myself off, to create barriers to protect myself from getting hurt. But in doing so, I felt even more alone. As I grew older, I began to realize that this sensitivity was not something I could erase or wish away. I began to notice that certain people seemed to understand me. They didn't dismiss my emotions or tell me to be tougher. Instead, they listened, they saw me. For the first time in my life, I felt understood. I didn't feel like an outsider. But even then, the struggle was never far behind. It wasn't just about finding the right people, It was about learning how to exist in a world that didn't always have the space for people like me. I had to learn how to navigate my sensitivity in a way that didn't completely overwhelm me. It wasn't until years later that I realized something crucial, that my sensitivity was not a flaw. It wasn't something that needed to be fixed or erased. It was simply a part of who I was. But that realization didn't come easily. It took years of struggle, of feeling lost, alone, and misunderstood. It took years of hiding my true self, trying to be someone I wasn't, just to fit in. But once I started to embrace my sensitivity, to honor it instead of hiding it, I began to see a shift. And that's when everything changed. I began to slowly find my way back to myself. It wasn't easy. There were still days where the world felt too much, where the flood of emotions was overwhelming. But there were also days where I could stand tall in my sensitivity, knowing that it was a gift, not a burden. I began to see that being highly sensitive wasn't something to hide, it was something to be proud of. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. The struggle has shaped me, molded me into someone who can navigate life's challenges with a deeper understanding of myself. I've learned to embrace my sensitivity, not as something to be fixed, but as a part of me that makes me who I am. If you're reading this and feeling like I once did, overwhelmed by your sensitivity, know that you're not alone. I've been there. I felt what you're feeling, and I understand the struggle. But what I can tell you now is that there is hope. There is a way to embrace your sensitivity, to live a life that's not consumed by it, but empowered by it. The journey isn't easy, but it is worth every step. I found my way, and I believe you can too. The solutions I found to transform my life are here in this book, waiting for you. You don't have to walk this path alone anymore. There were times when I felt like I was walking through life with a foggy haze surrounding me. The clarity I needed seemed just out of reach, and every step forward felt like a struggle. I remember sitting in silence, staring at the walls, feeling an ache deep inside. It was as if I was constantly trying to hold on to something that was slipping away, something I couldn't fully grasp. The more I tried to push through the overwhelm, the worse it became. I often wondered if I was just weak. If everyone else could handle life's demands with ease, why couldn't I? The most painful part was that I felt disconnected. Not just from others, but from myself. My sensitivity, which once felt like a gift, became a source of isolation. I couldn't share my struggles because I feared being judged, seen as fragile, or too emotional. I kept my struggles to myself, letting them fester in the quiet corners of my mind. On the outside, I tried to appear strong, put together. But on the inside, I was falling apart, crumbling under the weight of all the feelings I couldn't seem to manage. I remember one night, a conversation with a close friend that should have been comforting, but left me feeling worse. They tried to console me, but when they said, "You're just too sensitive. Maybe you should toughen up," it felt like a dagger. It wasn't the first time I had heard those words, but that night, it stung like never before. I wasn't being overly dramatic. I wasn't seeking attention. I was just trying to survive in a world that often felt too much for me to handle. As I looked around, I saw others moving through life effortlessly, or so it seemed. I would watch them in social settings, effortlessly joining in on conversations, laughing, joking, without a care in the world. Meanwhile, I would stand in the corner, overwhelmed by the noise, the energy, the pressure to fit in. I couldn't engage like they could. It felt like there was a barrier between me and everyone else, a wall I couldn't tear down. But what hurt the most was when my sensitivity affected my relationships. It wasn't just the big moments that caused tension, but the small ones. A look that wasn't meant to hurt, but I took it as rejection. A quiet pause in conversation that felt like a judgment. I would overanalyze everything, and it made me hard to be around. I saw the strain in my partner's eyes as I pulled away, as I withdrew into my own world. I didn't know how to explain it, didn't know how to make them understand that it wasn't about them. It was about me, my mind, my emotions, my heightened sensitivity that I didn't know how to control. I couldn't keep pushing people away, but I didn't know how to let them in. The more I fought against it, the worse it got. It wasn't until I finally accepted that I couldn't keep running from myself that things began to change. But even that realization didn't come easy. It took time. It took a lot of trial and error, falling down, picking myself back up, and trying again. I had to face the fact that my sensitivity was a part of me. I had to stop fighting it, stop thinking of it as a curse or a burden. I had to accept it, flaws and all. I wish I could say that one day it all clicked, and I woke up with a sense of peace. But it didn't happen like that. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It took months, no years, of gentle work on myself. I had to change my mindset, challenge the way I viewed my sensitivity. It was like peeling back layers of old beliefs and fears, allowing myself to be vulnerable, to feel without shame. Slowly, I began to reconnect with myself in ways I had never done before. I began to listen to my body, to my emotions, instead of pushing them aside. There were days when the weight was still heavy. Days when I couldn't find the words, couldn't find the strength to face the world. But there were also moments of clarity, moments where I realized I had a choice. I could choose to embrace my sensitivity, to honor it, instead of letting it consume me. I could choose to protect my energy, to set boundaries, and to find ways to live a life that worked with who I was, not against it. I know now that my sensitivity is not a weakness. It is my strength. It gives me a depth of understanding, an empathy that allows me to connect with others in a way few people can. I feel things deeply, but that depth also allows me to experience the beauty of the world in ways others might miss. It was about me, my mind, my emotions, my heightened sensitivity that I didn't know how to control. I couldn't keep pushing people away, but I didn't know how to let them in. The more I fought against it, the worse it got. It wasn't until I finally accepted that I couldn't keep running from myself that things began to change. But even that realization didn't come easy. It took time. It took a lot of trial and error, falling down, picking myself back up, and trying again. I had to face the fact that my sensitivity was a part of me. I had to stop fighting it, stop thinking of it as a curse or a burden. I had to accept it, flaws and all. I wish I could say that one day it all clicked, and I woke up with a sense of peace. But it didn't happen like that. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It took months, no years, of gentle work on myself. I had to change my mindset, challenge the way I viewed my sensitivity. It was like peeling back layers of old beliefs and fears, allowing myself to be vulnerable, to feel without shame. Slowly, I began to reconnect with myself in ways I had never done before. I began to listen to my body, to my emotions, instead of pushing them aside. There were days when the weight was still heavy. Days when I couldn't find the words, couldn't find the strength to face the world. But there were also moments of clarity, moments where I realized I had a choice. I could choose to embrace my sensitivity, to honor it, instead of letting it consume me. I could choose to protect my energy, to set boundaries, and to find ways to live a life that worked with who I was, not against it. I know now that my sensitivity is not a weakness. It is my strength. It gives me a depth of understanding, an empathy that allows me to connect with others in a way few people can. I feel things deeply, but that depth also allows me to experience the beauty of the world in ways others might miss. It gives me the ability to truly listen, to truly see people for who they are, to be present in ways that bring me peace and healing. It's taken time, but I've learned to see my sensitivity as a gift rather than a burden. There are still moments when I feel overwhelmed, when I retreat into myself, but they are fewer and further between. I've learned how to take care of my emotions, how to nurture my sensitivity without letting it control me. It's not about changing who I am. It's about understanding who I am and learning how to live in harmony with myself. If you're reading this and you feel the same way I did, lost, overwhelmed, unsure of where to turn, I want you to know that there is hope. There is a way forward. The road to embracing your sensitivity won't be easy, but it will be worth it. You don't have to hide who you are. You don't have to fight against yourself. The solutions I found to navigate my sensitivity are here, waiting for you. They help me transform my life, and I know they can help you too. But the journey is yours to take. You are not alone in this. There came a point when I realized I couldn't keep running from my sensitivity. I had been fighting it for years, trying to silence my emotions and dull my feelings, convinced that I had to fit into a world that didn't seem to understand me. The more I tried to suppress my sensitivity, the worse it got. My energy would deplete quickly, my mood would shift without warning, and I would end up feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by things others could brush off so easily. But there was one small yet crucial step I took that changed everything. I decided to listen to myself. I began by acknowledging that I couldn't change who I was. My sensitivity was a part of me, not something to be ashamed of. I had to stop seeing it as a weakness and start seeing it as a tool, a gift that could help me in ways I hadn't even imagined yet. The first change was in the way I talked to myself. For years, I had been my harshest critic. When I felt overwhelmed, I would tell myself I was weak, too emotional, or not cut out for the challenges life presented. I began to turn those thoughts around. Instead of criticizing myself, I started treating myself with kindness, with compassion. I reminded myself that it was okay to feel deeply. It was okay to take time to recharge when the world felt too much. By replacing negative self-talk with supportive affirmations, I slowly began to rebuild my self-esteem. Another thing I realized was how essential it was to protect my energy. I started setting boundaries in both my personal and professional life. I learned how to say no, how to prioritize my needs without feeling guilty. I gave myself permission to step away from situations or people that drained me. It wasn't easy at first. The guilt of saying no often crept in, but over time, I realized that taking care of myself didn't make me selfish. It made me healthier, more balanced, and more capable of showing up for the people I loved. Along with boundaries, I knew I had to be mindful of my environment. The noise, the chaos, the constant demands, it all played a role in how I felt. I started creating a space that nurtured my sensitivity. I filled my home with calming colors, soft lighting, and soothing scents. I set aside time every day to unplug from technology and social media, opting for activities that allow me to reconnect with myself, like reading or journaling. These small changes made a big impact on my emotional well-being. I began to feel more grounded, more at peace with my sensitivity, rather than overwhelmed by it. But perhaps the most important shift was in how I viewed my relationships. I had always thought that being sensitive made me difficult to be around. I feared that I was too much for others to handle, that I would push them away with my emotions. But the truth was, my sensitivity wasn't something to hide. It was something to share. I began to open up to those I trusted, letting them know how I was feeling and what I needed. At first, it felt vulnerable, scary even, but as I started to express myself honestly, I realized something powerful. My sensitivity was an asset in relationships, not a hindrance. It wasn't just my relationships with others that needed work. It was also my relationship with myself. I had spent years neglecting my own needs, convinced that I had to push through to be strong. But in reality, strength came from acknowledging my emotions, from allowing myself to feel, and from understanding that it was okay to not be okay sometimes. I learned to celebrate my sensitivity rather than apologize for it. It became my superpower. Of course, none of this happened overnight. It wasn't an instant transformation. I stumbled. I fell back into old habits. But with each step, I got closer to embracing who I truly was. The emotional fog began to lift. I felt more in control of my life, my emotions, and my energy. And while I was still sensitive, I no longer saw it as a weakness. I learned how to channel it, how to use it to my advantage. There were practical tools that helped me along the way, tools that guided me through the process of not just accepting my sensitivity, but using it to create a life that felt balanced and fulfilling. And it was through these methods that I was able to embrace my sensitivity fully. I came to understand that my sensitivity wasn't just something to manage or hide away. It was something to be celebrated, nurtured, and protected. It was a part of who I was, and I had to honor it. The journey wasn't easy, but looking back, it was worth every single step. My sensitivity became the foundation for a life of deep connection, empathy, and understanding. It allowed me to truly see people, to be there for them in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. I found my true strength in embracing who I was. For anyone who feels like they're too sensitive, like they're constantly drowning in their emotions, or struggling to fit into a world that feels overwhelming, I want you to know that there is a way forward. I've been there. I felt the pain, the frustration, the exhaustion of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. But you don't have to stay there. You can embrace your sensitivity and transform your life just like I did. The answers, the tools, and the steps I took to overcome my struggles are all in the Highly Sensitive Person's Handbook. Understand and embrace your sensitivity. This book was my guide, my companion through the most transformative journey of my life. If you're ready to understand and embrace your sensitivity in a way that brings peace and balance, this book will be your roadmap. You can get your digital copy at libraryffy.com, and trust me, it will change everything for you the way it did for me. The truth is, I couldn't have imagined how freeing it would feel to fully embrace my sensitivity. When I was struggling, I felt like I was constantly fighting a battle I couldn't win. But when I started to accept who I truly was, everything shifted. The weight of constantly trying to suppress my emotions lifted, and I could finally breathe. I remember a day, not long ago, when I had an encounter that would have sent me into a spiral before. A situation that used to trigger my overwhelm, make my heart race, and my mind spin in a whirlwind of emotions. But this time, I handled it differently. Instead of retreating into myself or pushing my feelings down, I allowed myself to feel. I felt the frustration, the sadness, the disappointment, and instead of drowning in it, I acknowledged it. I took a deep breath, grounded myself, and allowed the emotions to pass through me rather than consuming me. That moment was a turning point. I realized that I wasn't controlled by my sensitivity anymore. It was my strength. The world can be a harsh place for someone who feels everything deeply. The pressure to conform, to act normal, and to be tough can feel suffocating. But learning to embrace my sensitivity, rather than seeing it as something I needed to hide, allowed me to live with authenticity. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace with myself. I no longer saw my sensitivity as a flaw. It was a gift that allowed me to connect with the world in a profound way. One of the key lessons I learned was that I needed to create a routine that honored my sensitivity. I had to prioritize rest and quiet moments in a way that felt intentional, rather than reactive. I set aside time every day to meditate, to sit in silence, and to reconnect with myself. I realized that I had spent years running from my need for solitude, when in reality, it was essential for my well-being. I started to structure my days so that I had the time and space I needed to recharge. I knew that when I took care of myself, I could show up better for the people in my life. Incorporating mindfulness practices also helped me navigate the emotional waves that often come with being highly sensitive. Learning to be present in the moment, rather than getting lost in my thoughts or worries, allowed me to respond to situations with more clarity and calm. It wasn't about suppressing my emotions. It was about giving myself the space to feel without being overwhelmed by them. It's a delicate balance, but it's one that can be learned, and it's one that has brought so much peace into my life. But perhaps the most significant change came in how I viewed my relationships. I used to believe that being sensitive made me difficult to love or hard to understand. But as I grew more comfortable with my sensitivity, I began to recognize how deeply I could connect with others. I could empathize in a way that others couldn't. I could listen with an open heart and offer a kind word or a shoulder to lean on. My sensitivity was a gift, not a burden. And as I began to open up to others, I found that the people who truly mattered in my life didn't see my sensitivity as a weakness. They saw it as an asset. I could be myself, fully and unapologetically. I could show up in my relationships as my authentic self, and in turn, those relationships became deeper, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. I stopped hiding parts of myself, and instead, I embraced them. And in that process, I discovered that real connection comes when you allow yourself to be vulnerable and honest. Of course, the journey wasn't always smooth. There were still moments when I felt overwhelmed, when the world felt too loud and too much. But I had learned to navigate those moments with compassion for myself. I knew that sensitivity wasn't something to be ashamed of. It wasn't something to fight against. It was something to work with. And when I worked with it, it transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Today, I live with a sense of calm that I never thought was possible. I still feel deeply, but now I understand that it's not a curse, it's a blessing. I've learned how to protect my energy, to honor my boundaries, and to embrace my sensitivity with pride. I've learned how to communicate my needs and to take the time I need to recharge. I'm no longer apologizing for being who I am. And that is the greatest gift I could ever give myself. For anyone watching this who is struggling with their sensitivity, I want you to know that you are not alone. There is a way to live fully and authentically as a highly sensitive person. You don't have to fight against your emotions or try to numb yourself. You can learn to embrace them, to honor them, and to use them to create a life that feels aligned with who you truly are. The journey can feel long, and the path may not always be clear, but there is hope. The strategies, tools, and mindset shifts that help me embrace my sensitivity and transform my life are all laid out in the Highly Sensitive Person's Handbook. Understand and embrace your sensitivity. If you are ready to take the first step toward accepting and honoring your sensitivity, I highly recommend this book. It gave me the guidance I needed to truly understand my emotions and learn to navigate them with confidence and grace. You can get your digital copy today at LibriFFY.com. Trust me, it will change your life just as it changed mine. The link is in the description, and thanks for watching. See you in the next video.